We have just covered quite a few items there about research methodology in translation or research methodologies in translation studies, which are two books that are really, one of them by Basil Hatem and the other one is by Saladana and O'Brien, which are really useful in 2012 and 2013. Which you can use as a researcher to improve your own way of how to, of course it will tell you things like how to set up your questions, what kind of questions, the number of questions, also the focus groups, how to set them up, the interviews, what kind of questions to ask, the scaling that you need to be following as well in that. So today I'm going to talk about, this is episode 9, which is research quality, and in this one I'm going to talk about certain elements in research quality which are relating to reliability, excuse me, validity is one, reliability is another, generalizability is another, qualitative methods, credibility, and warrantability as well. So we'll start with validity, which means is it true or is it valid? Is it and then research here, of course, is to be conducted with high quality standards, since it's about making a contribution to an existing knowledge. According to Guba and Lincoln in 2005, validity is related to whether one's findings are sufficiently authentic, trustworthy, and related to some reality. That is really what validity can be called. Another researcher in 2007 insists on the importance of validation to strengthen research methods in translation, achieved by highlighting the challenges and the solutions in quantitative and qualitative approaches to research. Validity using quantitative research depends on the reliability, how reliable it is, the reliability and sampling methods of the data collected and analyzed. So they look at that reliability element in there to see if it's valid or not valid, and see the sampling methods of the data and the way the data has been analyzed. Another type of validity is using qualitative research in qualitative research, and that depends on other new set of validity measurements such as credibility and warrantability. Warrantability and credibility. These are two elements that are related to the qualitative research, whereas the quantitative research is focused on the reliability and the sampling methods of the data collected and analyzed, according to Toynisco. Now, Wood and Kroger in 2000 state that validity is not different from truth, which is not applicable to a dynamic, constantly changing social world. So you're looking at the truth, and if it is valid, if it's truthful. And these two scholars have come up with a set of criteria. First, in terms of scientific criteria, validity requires the analysis to be sound, principled, credible, convincing, and well-grounded on evidence. These are very, very important on being grounded on good evidence, and it's convincing and credible. Believable, that is. And in terms of moral criteria, it requires to consider how reality is constructed and what might be the consequences. Is it really the reality is true to what reality is about or not? Now, there are two threats to validity here. Internal threats caused by the researchers themselves, which can affect the actual validity, and how the research is conducted. And of course, the participants can actually play a part in this element here, whereas the external threats are related to ecological validity, measurement validity as well. We'll describe the first one, which is internal threats. Let's have a look at them. And we've seen them, as you've seen, they are researchers that can be caused by researchers and can be caused by the research conducted or by the participants themselves. So in the internal threats, we have threats from researchers themselves. And that is the research can bring in personal attribute effect, like gender or race or color or creed, by making the task ambiguous, or even bring in his or her ideology and expectations. You see, the researcher should not really bring in all these personal attribute effects, because the researcher's attitudes or ideologies and beliefs and expectations should not be expressed to the participants, nor should there be any things relating to the creed, the belief, to the color, to the gender, to the race. And the solution, of course, is self-reflectivity, reflexivity would help to overcome that. So you reflect on that, or see what is your self-reflex on it. So the self-reflex can help you overcome such personal attribute effect. The other second effect, which is the researcher's unintentional expectancy effect. In other words, what does the researcher expect unintentionally? And then trying to influence the responses of the audience through the use of leading questions. So you put some questions that will influence your audience in one way or another. So the solution will be that the researcher should remove himself or herself and employ research assistant, somebody else, who should follow standard procedures like writing a pre-task protocol perhaps. And also there can be an internal threat that comes from how the research is conducted. And this includes validity and reliability of the procedures. Are they valid? The procedures, are they valid? Are they reliable? The history as well, which can change, changes in the environment influence the results of a study, particularly for a longitude research like the case study research that extends over a very long period of time. If you're doing research for, let's say, 10 years or 5 years or 1 year or 2 years, that can change because of the history. And then the data will be different. And of course, sensitization and data analysis. To sensitize is important as well, because sensitization is referred to the measurement or the procedure used to analyze data. So sensitization is referred to the measurement or procedure used to analyze data. Here the researcher should implement careful procedures for data analysis and evaluation with the help of trained evaluations or evaluators or transcribers. Threat from the research participants themselves, like for example the Hawthorne effect, which refers to the change that occurs in the participants' behavior for being studied. So they might change their way of responding because they are being studied, and that's why they are changing that. And the solution, of course, the researcher should not let people know that they are being studied, which raises ethical concerns, or use a large participant group or a post-task debriefing. In other words, after they finish the task, you ask them or you tell them about what you are trying to ask them about. However, scarcity of participants and time can be disappointing, which will increase or decrease rather the reliability of the results of the research as well. And that is really a problem because there are hardly any participants, and also the problem of time. And then there is also this statistical regression, which is a reduction or a change which can be positive or negative. Regression occurs when a sample is non-random, so you are selecting it non-randomly, and the two variables being tested are not correlated in any way. They are not co-linked. And that is another threat here for this one. And the solution is to consider avoiding making invalid claims. Then there is the mortality issue, which refers to the loss of participants or the loss and destruction of the documents or the data. And in this case, of course, the researcher has no control over the participants, but can back up the data and apply other data security plans. Maturation, being mature, referring to the changes that occur within people over time, because they mature more, then over time there will be changes there. And of course the researcher cannot prevent that, but can be aware of it and consider its implications for the study being conducted if it is conducted for a long period of time, like over years, 10 years, 20 years. And of course the inter-job bias occurring when those being studied influence each other. They tell each other, influence each other. So you should not, in any way, each participant should not influence other participants when they are doing that. And the researcher sessions can be conducted on an individual basis, and if not possible, a briefing document asking the participants not to discuss the study, and that will be very helpful. Now, external threats that come from outside, ecological validity, for example, and that is the need to conduct a research in a way that reflects real life situations in which, or in order to increase its generalization or generalizability. Because with an artificial container, our knowledge is contained. So you need to show that it is a real life situation. When the translator is translating something, this is real life. That's why then you can generalize on that and increase the generalization or generalizability of it. And of course, ecological validity is important when we claim to study people like interpreters or processes like professional conference interpreting, for example. Also, an experiment with student interpreters, results with low ecological validity. Of course, it will result in very low validity. Therefore, the study should be carried out in the interpreting booths at a conference to maximize the ecological validity, which adds to the quality and credibility of research. When you are doing research in the actual booth, if you are recording what the interpreters are interpreting at the time, this is very real life situation. And here, the validity of your data is incredibly good, because this is a real life situation. It's not actually a pretend or simulated situation. And that is really very important. And then, of course, the measurement of validity, techniques used to acquire data and measure the data, of course. For example, in a research, we are forced to select a sample of participants or texts, and in order to answer a research question or research, in order to answer that, researchers must consider the sampling techniques. You need to know the techniques and the sampling itself and know how to handle it. Finding an ideal sample regarding methods and size is difficult and impossible, but helps to increase validity and results with generalization or generalizability of the findings. So you can generalize on the findings when you are having it in this way, when you have an ideal sample in your finding, and you are finding that best or ideal sample with regards to the method and the size. Of course, there are ways of collecting samples in research, and these ways of sampling are depending on each researcher, how they sample their, for example, texts that they are translated texts that they actually collect in order to analyze, or the translators they are actually studying in order to see how a translator maybe thinks when they are translating, if you're looking at that, or if you're looking at the practice of translation and asking interpreters or translators how are they paid, what kind of level of employment, or whatever your actually research is about, whether it's in interpreting or in translation. So you need to do you need to do sampling, and collecting samples on what basis? How do you do the sampling? How do you select these texts? How do you select these translators? Let's have a look at some of these ways and rules or methods for sampling. There is what's called random sampling, and it's probability sampling, another word for it, which is considered the gold standard and uses a random number of generator to select the participants for the study, and the same thing goes for this text. So in other words, you are selecting them randomly, and the number is random. You can say that. And even the text, you can say that the text is selected randomly, not on purpose. Then there is also the systematic sampling, using a fixed intervals from a list. For example, you can choose the 10th sample from every group, from every list that you have. So you take the 10th sample of, let's say you've got 100 samples, and the 10th sample of these hundreds, like for example number 10, number 20, number 30, number 40, number 50, 60, 70, 80, and 90, and 100, this is the ones that you have sampled in your interval from every group, for example. Or you can stratify, i.e. different layers of the sampling. You can do that, where we ensure that a specific group within the population is well represented, really. And then the texts from each group are included in the sample. So you are including from the group some representative kind of selection from each group. From each group you select someone who represents that group. And from each text, like text types, if it's legal, you select from the legal, from each group you select one. From the medical, also, there are different types of medical, if it's to do with the medicine, or we're talking about, let's say, theories, different theories, you select from them, out of 10 theories, one of them, or a certain aspect of each theory, perhaps. Or of the texts, you select as well. And if you talk about medical, if it's the medication you talk about, or illnesses, or diagnosis, or physical description of the patient, and so on. So there are more of these samples, which is called cluster sampling, which involves a group or cluster of individual units as well. That's clustering. And then there is a stage sampling, which you can do it in 2 stages or 3-stage sampling. And that is random sampling from a large population or group, followed by a smaller sample from the same population or the same group. So you select them, you sample them twice. So you do the first sampling of the whole large group, and from that group, the smaller group that you have sampled, you resample again from that group to make it a smaller kind of sample. So that is called stage sampling. There's also purposive sampling, where you have a purpose in your mind, which involves selecting a sample based on certain critical parameters, for example, like corpus-based studies or interview-based studies. So you actually base your sample according to a purpose. The last sample here is convenience and snowball sampling, which is used in humanities and social sciences and in translation research as well, and that is due to lack of resources. Convenience sampling is recruiting easily accessible participants or texts from internet sites. So it might be because it's easily accessible, you took them out of convenience, whereas snowball sampling is the recruitment of a group of participants who recruit other participants. So you're recruiting them, and they recruit others, and it goes on in a snowball way. In a translation research that's made by bilinguals, researchers should not make claims about professional translation behavior here, because it's out of convenience here that's being selected, and not when going through some agencies and selecting it systematically. Now, the last thing we are going to talk about is to do with the ethics, which I will cover in that. Of course, there's Saladana and O'Brien. Saladana needs to an H, and which deals with the ethics or research ethics.